Chapter 29. Stepping inside, I didn't think to look behind the door, straight up the logical place for a surviving pumpkin to be waiting in ambush. And that's exactly where the bastard was. Fly, Arlene shouted. She was paying attention. She never used that tone of voice except when it was life and death, and in this case, the issue was my life. I threw myself on the floor just as a lightning ball fried the tip of my scalp. A run of 10mm rounds got my attention. I flipped over to see Arlene blasting away, then scrambled to my feet and pumped my shotgun at the floating head. She split left and I right, and we kept firing. When we were done, that was the deadest pumpkin I had ever seen still floating. It was almost like one of those old cartoons where the character hangs in space for several seconds before it remembers the law of gravity, then quickly plummets to the ground. All that was missing were the sound effects. "Incoming!" yelled Rich, outside the door. We hadn't forgotten the other pumpkins. We'd hoped they might have forgotten us, though. "Get in!" Arlene yelled, pulling at Rich's sleeve. He didn't need another hint. The moment he joined us, we slammed the door shut and jammed the latch with Arlene's pistol. The latch immediately rattled. God only knew what the pumpkins were using for hands. "Look," Rich said, pointing. Protruding from under a dead imp were the pieces of a box of shotgun shells, along with shells. "They may be covering all kinds of supplies," I said. The prospect didn't appeal to me, but I thought I should set a good example. Getting on my knees, I pulled the corpse away from the box, and dozens of shells went rolling as Arlene and Rich collected them. Then we all got busy moving the dead monsters and stacking them in one corner. We received our just reward. There was another functional shotgun, lots of ammo, even tools, hammers, nails, even a gas-powered chainsaw. Maybe the zombies had been used to build condos for imps and pumpkins. We even found an antique revolver for Rich. I wondered which one of us the civilian would accidentally shoot. We replaced the pistol in the latch with a handful of nails, then collected all the tools and put them in a neat pile for later use. Weapons and ammo in hand, we explored the room and found it led to a broader plaza area. Then we found a door leading into a narrow corridor. "I'll go first," I said. "Fine with me," said Arlene. Rich was more than happy to bring up the rear. No good deed goes unpunished. I realized that the moment I heard the familiar pig grunting noises, the ugly snuffling that always turned my stomach and might keep me from ever eating bacon again. They didn't make us wait very long. The demons came storming down the corridor, pale pink flesh with claws and lots of teeth. Somehow, though, after the steam demon, I couldn't take the pinkies seriously. The narrowness of the corridor meant I had taken point with a vengeance. No one could shoot past me. I loosed a shotgun blast. "Fall back," I shouted, and heard Arlene and Rich doing it. Taking steps backward, I never took my eyes off the enemy. I shot a second time, then a third and fourth time, before dropping the first demon. I didn't like the arithmetic. Despite our extra ammo, there were more demons than we could take down at this rate. My comrades had made it back through the door as I held the corridor back to the wall. I kept firing, when suddenly, "Hold fire." It was Arlene's voice, and I couldn't imagine that she'd gone nuts. I risked turning my head. She stood in the doorway, holding the chainsaw. Then with a chugga she pulled the cord. Third time was the charm, and it kicked to life with an honest roar to drown out all but a steam demon's scream. Elbowing past me, she lifted the buzzing blade and let the teeth bite into the nearest demon. "Die, Pinky, die!" she screamed. It sounded odd, but the results were great. Red blood splashed us both, and she kept at it, screaming a war cry that just might scare a fallen angel. Arlene waded through them, working the saw, beads of sweat and drops of blood covering her face. A demon arm fell to the floor, blood exploding in a torrent. She slipped on the gore, but the movement carried her forward and the saw buried itself in the chest of the next demon, ripping a death gurgle from the creature. I tried to get to her to help, but the demon corpses were in the way. She worked the chainsaw loose but fell backward, swinging it in a wide arc. A large demon swung its claw down hard and knocked the chainsaw out of her hand. Before Arlene could get away, another claw ripped her open. She didn't scream but fell silently. The sight drove me mad. Somewhere in the back of my mind I'd accepted the likelihood of our being blown to bits, but I wouldn't have us die like animals. Picking up the saw, I revved it and finished the damned job, shoving the blade into the face of the one who had hurt her. I lost count of how many were left, but I kept at it, swinging the chainsaw back and forth, covering the walls with gore. Finally, there was nothing left to kill. The red haze lifted and I remembered Arlene. Turning back, I saw that Rich was with her, trying to staunch the bleeding with improvised first aid. My right sleeve was already in tatters, so it was a simple matter to rip off a strip of cloth and use it for bandages. We patched her up as best we could. Her face was pale and she was weak, but she was alive. "Can you move?" I asked. "Move or die," she wheezed, "so I'll move." We helped her stand up. I started to pick up her shotgun and pass it to Rich, but she shook her head. "That's mine," she said, reclaiming it proudly. I wasn't about to argue. We left the heavy chainsaw on the deck and staggered forward into a last chamber. There were disgusting things lying around, but as nothing was moving or alive, I gave it no further attention. In the center of the room was a teleport pad of rusted metal, designed in a heavy and cumbersome manner. It looked like an antique. "That doesn't look promising," I said. "We have no choice," Arlene answered through clenched teeth. We hadn't had a good choice in a long, long time. All three of us stepped aboard, arms linked. Rich must have been religious. He said a prayer. Maybe because it was an old-fashioned teleporter, the experience was different from the others, like the special effects were provided by a different company. I noticed sounds that were new, a wind tunnel combined with an avalanche, and there was the sensation of falling turning into floating. Then we arrived. "Wow," Rich said. He wasn't as used to this stuff as we were. The terminus was a rock garden. Although the light was dim, we could make out the twisted, curved, and warped rocks that made me think of a giant coral reef, except the color and texture of the formations was the same as desert camo. Met our old friends, the zombies. Arlene fired first. The opportunity to fight put life back in her again. Most of these zombies weren't armed, ex-UAC civvies, which was fine with me. Rich got off a couple of shots as well. I don't know if he hit anything. Abruptly, I realized we had a more serious problem than the Walking Dead crew. I'd almost forgotten the real spooks, the ghost things I thought of as specters. One touched my face with all the coldness of space. I hit at the horror wildly, but struck Rich instead, knocking him to the ground. It was joined by some of its buddies, those flying metal skulls I hoped never to see again. They bombed us like kamikaze pilots. Then Rich found the back of a specter head by swinging his hands. He put his revolver against its skull and squeezed off a point-blank round. That got the critter's attention. It spun to deal with Rich, turning its back on me. I blew its head apart with the riot gun. Somehow the idea of a ghost you can slice and dice appealed to me. I didn't think the nuns would approve. The damned specter went down screaming like a banshee and bleeding something that stank of ice-cold graveyards. While I was auditioning for Ghostbusters, Arlene popped the flying skulls. They didn't require as much firepower as the pumpkins. Rich took care of the remaining zombies. "Aim for the head, just like the movie," Arlene shouted. He was doing okay for a novice, and naturally gravitated to the easiest job. But he acquitted himself well. I was happy we had found him. Finally the wave of bad guys subsided and we could play beachcombers. There wasn't much worth grabbing this time, however, only a bit of ammo and a sig cow for Rich from the poorly equipped zombies. Now seemed a good moment to find out more about Bill. Arlene thought his goblin might be a hell prince and described one, but he shook his head. "Not a minotaur, it was more like a giant spider," he said. "Oh, great," said Arlene, "a new one for the files." We found out Bill Rich was a computer programmer. If we found any monsters with laptops, he would prove invaluable. To be fair, he'd done fine killing his quota of zombies. "How'd you get captured in the first place?" Arlene asked. Rich sighed. "Classic case of this can't really be happening to us. When we were," he stopped, face turning red. When he started up again, I knew he had skipped something important. Later, I thought, we were studying the gates. And suddenly one of them on Dimos experienced a marked drop in temperature. It started glowing, too. But I thought Dimaz was deserted when all this started, I interrupted. You were supposed to think that, he said. When the UAC found alien electronics and started, then we all crowded in to see, and that's when they started coming through, the goblins. Aliens, I mean. Which ones? I asked. Which ones came first? The first thing through was one of those things you call an imp. It looked at us and grinned, and we were all frozen in total shock. We didn't know what to say or do, our first contact with an alien race, and we were speechless. All those wonderful plans about what we were going to say and how we were going to react. Well, how did the imp react? Arlene was always good at cutting through the plastic to get to the meat. Rich shook his head sadly, remembering something painful. It threw one of those wads of phosphorus mucoid and killed a senior scientist and 2 Air Force captains. I was in the back, thank God. A woman screamed. I think it was Dr. Tyya Graf. Then another one came through, and we panicked. Mob scene. Like Soylent Green. Arlene MHMMED, but I was confused. Must have been another old movie reference. If I hadn't been such a big guy, I would have been trampled. As it was, I was knocked down. I tried to get up, and they squirted some sort of webbing around me, a neurotoxin that paralyzed me. I was out of it for some indeterminate time, when I came to, this spider thing was interrogating me, and I was in a huge room, surrounded by hundreds of goblins of different types, and even some of those zombies. I recognized Graf, but I could tell right away she was dead and her body was just reanimated. And, well, that's the story. Speaking of which, Arlene interrupted with her own thoughts. Fly, do you notice there's a lot more zombie bodies here than anything else? Sure. So with all the noise we just made, why didn't a lot more come running? Curiosity may have killed the cat, I said, feeling flipped but never a zombie. Or maybe this is all of them. No brains, said Rich, bending over one of them. Arlene shook her head. I think it's because they never do anything there. Not told, she said. They must stay in constant communication with someone or something, and only go investigate when they receive a command. If they've been told to patrol, looking for humans, then they'll attack, otherwise, they might march right by us and not even see us. That imp who talked to me made me wonder if imps give them orders, I said. Maybe, but we've seen zombies where there are no imps. Maybe they get standing orders. I saw a bunch of imps come running to check out a situation once where all I'd done was get the zombies firing at each other. The imps couldn't control them. Well, the pig-snuffling demons don't have any intelligence worth mentioning, either, I said. If there's any more of them around, they wouldn't hear a battle over their own breathing. The skulls don't even have ears, Arlene said. Look, it's either hell princes, the steam demons, or that thing Bill described, the spider thing. Quote, the spider creature that interrogated me, Rich said, shuddering. We'll keep that in mind. Time to move on. Hugging the right wall, we discovered a narrowing, natural corridor with more shotgun shells lying on the floor like popcorn. We scooped them up, but I was disappointed to discover that some were defective or spent. I was preoccupied with a handful of questionable-looking specimens when they spilled through my fingers and I dropped to my knees to recover them. That saved my life. A shotgun blast filled the space where my head had been a moment before. Zombie. Rich called out anticlimactically. No one ever shot at us with human weapons except former humans. Another shot missed high, but there was no third attempt on yours truly. Arlene turned to fire, and froze. Fly, she whispered hoarsely. I stared. Jesus, it was Arlene's worst nightmare come true. Wilhelm Dodd, or what was left of him, lurched toward our little group, shifting his 12 gauge to get a better shot.